What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and today we're going to be taking a look at a deck that I had played on stream the previous weekend, and now I'm going to go over the deck itself. This isn't the exact list that I played Friday night or anything like that. This is kind of a more updated list of the archetype, and a buddy of mine plans on playing this in the RC, or we're testing it for the RC in Atlanta, and I figured now's a good time to kind of go over it, kind of introduce it, and look at least one of the more updated lists in the format. So, of course, before we get too deep into it, if you have not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more content like this, I also post a lot of modern and other essay type videos. Please consider subscribing and ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted, and it'll also notify you when I go live on YouTube as well. And in the link in the description down below, there is a link to the Discord server. Go ahead, follow that link, join over there as well. I'd love to have you. Now, Boros Convoke is this fancy deck that everyone kind of came up with, and it came into existence, and it was known for basically being able to put 14 power into play on turn 2 and with the potential to kill your opponent on turn 3, which is probably about as fast of like a creature combo deck you're going to get in Pioneer. I mean, I guess short of like window to combo, and that card's banned if that tells you anything of the format. So Boros Convoke is based around playing these powerful Convoke creatures, mainly Knight Errant of Eos and Venerated Loxodon. I say mainly because these are it. That's your Convoke creatures. So Knight Errant of Eos is the newer of the two. It came from the March of the Machine set. It's a 5-mana 4/4 with Convoke, and then when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke Knight Errant of Eos. You put the reveal cards in your hand, then shuffle your library. You also have Venerated Loxodon, which is essentially the same thing, 5-mana 4/4 with Convoke. When it enters the battlefield, it puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature that convoked it. So Venerated Loxodon is the way that you can put 14 power into play on turn 2 or turn 3, whatever turn it is, turn 2. So usually you start off with something like a Thraben Inspector, Voldaren Epicure. You can even do it with like an Ornithopter, although Ornithopter kind of enables like the turn 3 kills a little bit easier, which we'll get to here in a second. So Thraben Inspector and Voldaren Epicure both create an artifact token when they come into play, with Voldaren Epicure making a blood token, Thraben Inspector making a clue token. So with these, you're able to play one of these on turn 1. Probably a Thraben Inspector, it would be the easiest way. You play Thraben Inspector, you make the clue token. On your next turn, you play a card called Gleeful Demolition, which destroys an artifact, and if you control that artifact, you create 3 1/1 goblin creature tokens. So you have already a white creature in Voldaren Inspector. You then have Gleeful Demolition. You cast a Gleeful Demolition on turn 2, and then you play like another Voldaren Epicure. You play, maybe you just play a Giant Killer, cast an Ornithopter, what have you, and then you can play a Venerated Loxodon or a Knight Errant of Eos, essentially for free. This also kind of works if you play like an Ornithopter, play Gleeful Demolition, and then play a card like Resolute Reinforcements, which creates a 1/1 white soldier creature token, which will give you the 5 creatures necessary to be able to convoke for full price on Knight Errant and Venerated Loxodon. Just kind of name a few variations where you can get to 5 creatures. Even in the one we were talking about where you go Thraben Inspector and then play Gleeful Demolition on turn 2, you can then pay the 1 mana and you can Knight Errant and still get, everything in your deck minus other Venerated Loxodons and Knight Errant of Eoses. Obviously, Venerated Loxodon kind of generates the super quick kills where you're able you have a ton of power into play already, and the Venerated Loxodon puts upwards of 9 power more into play. And then from there, you can go into these situations where you play Imodane's Recruiter and Reckless Bushwhacker, who both kind of do the same thing. Where Recruiter, when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. Reckless Bushwhacker, you have to cast a spell beforehand, but if you do, then other creatures you control get +1/+0 and have haste, which again set up those turns where you can like play an Ornithopter, and then you can surge a Reckless Bushwhacker. A little bit easier on the mana, considering that you really don't want to flood out with this deck. Knight Errant kind of solves the problem by being able to kind of draw cards in a way and hopefully find gas by being able to dig 6 cards deeper and set up these turns where maybe you can go 1 mana creature into a Bushwhacker or Ornithopter Bushwhacker, or just find Imidane's Recruiter and an Ornithopter or something like that and be able to hopefully attack for lethal. Obviously, you have 14 power. You have Imidane becomes like a 3, and this becomes a 1. That becomes 18 power. Chances are you can probably figure out a win from there. So that is the general main game plan of the deck. Some of the other cards, Giant Killer is one I alluded to. It is a 1 mana 1/2. You can pay 2 mana and tap it to tap target creature, but it also has the ability to go on an adventure with the card Chop Down, which will destroy target creature power 4 or greater. Which is essentially like a tutorable like removal spell for this deck, and it doesn't have to play a third color to kind of get that. It also gets to be pretty aggressive in its own right, being a 1 mana creature where you can kill something and then you can play it and search a Bushwhacker later. It ends up being pretty good. We have the other half, I guess, of Imidane's Recruiter, which is like 5 mana, make 2/2/2s with Vigilance, which is pretty good considering then like you can play this and it ends up being like 9 power, for over 2 turns. If it, just assuming that you only have the 2 knights plus the Recruiter. You have Thalia Guardian of Thraben, which with the rise of the Phoenix decks, this can kind of set them back enough to where you can just kind of take a turn off of doing your super explosive thing and then force them to basically have to play around the Thalia or find an answer for the Thalia, which means they're not getting to answer your big, 5/5 or your 4/4s and things like that, to the point where you can take them off tempo enough that you could probably end up just killing them without having a super optimal draw to kind of try to combat them in that way. Also kind of becomes like a lightning rod for removal. When they want to try to get back their phoenixes, they're going to have to pay 2-3 mana for like their cantrips and things like that, and they obviously don't really want to do something like that. So Thalia definitely garners an answer in like those spell based decks. Going even further, you have cards like Legion's Landing, which is kind of like I think was kind of played in this deck and then like wasn't played, and I think now has finally settled in on a spot, with it being like an honorary land in a way for this deck. Makes a 1/1 white creature token with lifelink when it enters the battlefield, and if you attack with 3 or more creatures, transform Legion's Landing. You're easily doing this on like turn 3. It flips into a land that's going to tap for white mana, but then you can pay 3 and tap it to create a 1/1 creature token with lifelink, and this is kind of a way that you can start, rebuilding without your opponent really having a good way of interacting with like your lands. Eventually, you could just like end up making like 2 or 3 tokens over the course of a few turns, kind of like delay enough to where you can kind of get an explosive turn going where you can kind of rebuild and put 10 plus power into play, in a single turn. The lands, pretty easy. You have Den of the Bugbear, Iganjo, Seat of the Empire as like your utility lands. You have the same thing with Shvet Dunes, where it costs you life to tap it for colored mana, but you can pay 4 and sacrifice a desert. And creatures you control will get +1/+1 until end of turn. You can only activate this as a sorcery, but this is like another like anthem effect, a temporary anthem effect that you can use to kind of push damage and hopefully get those last points in. Sideboard, you have Forge Devils. I'm guessing. Now, this is just a bold statement here. I'm guessing this is for like the smaller creature matchups and like mono green in a way, because just getting to kind of like ping their dorks on the early turns, and again it just ends up being like an aggressive creature. You have another Giant Killer. You have Rending Volley, which is uncounterable, deal 4 for 1 mana to white and blue creatures. You have Deck and Stone to deal with some of the other go wide boards. You have Regal Leosaur, which is like another anthem effect, like I believe, which is crazy because like this deck does play like a decent amount, at least like Giant Killer, Thraben Inspector, Resolute Enforcements. You have Thalia. Imidane's Recruiter is a human. You have Knight Errant is a human. So you actually play a decent amount of creatures that are humans, and Mutate specifically says non-human creatures. But with Regal Leosaur, you can mutate onto any one of those other creatures. Chances are you're going to have one of these other creatures. It's also tutorable off of Night Era EVO, so it's a little bit better than some of the other just random Anthem effects. So pretty good inclusion for this deck. Rest in peace for the graveyard decks. Redain, God of the Worthy, who has deemed me not worthy because if I try to pull up her picture, it absolutely freaks out. And then you have a wedding announcement, which apparently I'm not invited to the wedding either, because also kind of freaking out. We know that like Redain is pretty good against the the Rakdos Sacrifice deck. That's kind of waning in popularity at the current moment, at least according to Goldfish, but still nonetheless a deck that you need to be prepared for. It's like in the top 4, top 5 decks in the metagame currently. Wedding Announcement allows you to be a little bit grindier as well. A little less in on the like I'm going to put a million power into play on like turn 2 or turn 3, but like this will also help kind of break those stalemates and stuff like in the mirror matches as well, where you just want your creatures to be bigger. It makes your opponent harder for your opponent to attack into, things like that. I will say that this list is differing a little bit for the fact that there is like Embercleave is missing. I've seen a few lists playing Embercleave, which people monikered Believe in the Cleave, and I would see, I would definitely like a version of Embercleave in this deck, or at least like 1 or 2 copies somewhere, just because it seems like it's really good. I mean, not as good as like some other decks where you have a creature that gets absolutely massive and you can just slap it on there and it's going to win the game. But making a 5/5 double strike trampler is also pretty good, if you're asking my opinion. So yeah, that is the Boros Convoke deck for the Pioneer format. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like on the video, share it with everybody, just kind of get the word out there, trying to really push the content and everything. So I'd appreciate any help that I can get. Of course, if there's a deck that you want to see, show off, whatnot, please leave it in the comments of this video down below. I always check the comments, so definitely appreciate it. It makes me feel pretty good as well. And of course, join the Discord server as well if you feel so inclined. That's going to do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.